Greetings and welcome everyone. My name is Asad Ali Jafri. I'm the Executive Director at the South Asia Institute. Welcome to our space here in Chicago, albeit virtually. South Asia Institute is an independent, nonprofit organization that cultivates and presents the art and culture of South Asia and its diaspora. We collaborate locally and globally, serve as a hub for experimentation, and engage emerging and established artists, creatives, and academics. Before we start today's program, I want to bring your attention to the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. It's right in the center. If you have any questions that come up during today's program, please feel free to click on that button, type in your question, and we will answer some of the questions that we receive by the end of the program. Today, SAI is collaborating with Kalapriya Center for the Indian Performing Arts. Kalapriya presents India's artistic diversity through the performing arts that preserve traditional South Asian art forms and build bridges between the performing arts and our contemporary lives. Kalapriya executes its mission through its educational programs and artistic programs driven by stories that are relevant to the communities and to the times we live in. Our moderator for today is Dr. Mridu Sekhar, who is the president of the board of the Kalapriya Foundation. Dr. Sekhar has lived and worked in Chicago for almost 5 decades and is passionate about the city and its many diverse communities. She received a PhD in physics from Boston College in 1974. Prior to her retirement, she worked in the computer industry and at the University of Chicago's Medical Center in Information Management. Between 1987 and 2008, she worked in the countries of the former Soviet Union and has collaborated with private and public institutions in the countries of Central Asia, Europe, and India. Having spent a lot of time in the Central Asian countries of Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and Azerbaijan, and even Siberia and Mongolia, she has a special feeling for the history of the region. Since retiring in 2008, she has dedicated herself to liberal politics and social justice initiatives. She has traveled extensively and is passionate about the subject of today's webinar, especially in that we are all migrants. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Mridu Sekhar.
Thank you, Asad, for that lovely introduction. It's been a pleasure to work with the South Asia Institute, with the founders and the staff in putting this program together. I'm hopeful that this is the beginning of many such collaborations between the South Asia Institute and Kalapriya. I am personally thrilled to introduce Tony Joseph, author of Early Indians, the story of our ancestors and where we came from. This is a very important subject, and the way Tony has handled it highlights the fact that we humans everywhere are migrants, all of us, and are all related. It is also a very important book for all of us, those from the subcontinent of India and the rest of the world. The greatest testimonial to Tony is that the book became a bestseller soon after it was published in December 2018. In less than 2 years, it has already had 11 reprints. Tony unravels the history using the latest science and addresses squarely many of the misconceptions about the region we call India, the Indians themselves, and Hinduism. It was published by Juggernaut and has so far won many, many awards. The Tata Lit Live Book of the Year Award, the Shakti Bhakt First Book Prize, the Ata Galata Bangalore Literature Festival Award for the best book. It has also been counted among the best nonfiction books of the decade by The Hindu. Tony comes to his work after almost 3 decades as a journalist, showing great respect for his sources. He has been the editor of Business World magazine, associate editor of Business Standard, and feature editor of the Economic Times. He has made Indian prehistory popular through his articles, which have appeared in many news media platforms in India: The Hindu, the Indian Express, the Quint, and the Scroll. We are thrilled to be the first to present Tony Joseph to mostly the US audience today. It took him 6 years to investigate and document the subject, which covers 6 different disciplines: archaeology, history, linguistics, philology, epigraphy, and population genetics. It is remarkable in that context that the book has been received so very well by leading scientists and academics from all these disciplines. Most recently, Professor Irfan Habib Indian historian of ancient and medieval history, says, Tony Joseph has given us a book that with its racy style is easy to read. By proposing puzzles, he makes dull evidence lively to the reader. He simultaneously maintains a level of academic accuracy that adds weight to his hypotheses and conclusions. This is a book which all who are interested in both history and historical method should read and enjoy. The book will be translated into 7 languages in the coming months: Hindi, Tamil, Telugu, Marathi, Gujarati, Bangla, and Malayalam. A new edition is likely to be out by the end of next year, and I'm told that the publisher is considering a new children's edition as well. And Tony is busy writing a sequel addressing the next 2,000 years. He has promised to let us present it when it does. I have really enjoyed getting to know him, and I thank you all for joining us today, and I think you will enjoy listening from him too. Tony, it's all yours.
Thank you very much, Mridu, for that very kind and generous introduction. And thank you all for being here today on a Sunday evening amidst a pandemic. I have been looking forward to this ever since Mridu spoke to me about it almost 6 months ago. And I am very glad that this is my first engagement with the US audience. Thank you to Kalapriya and to South Asia Institute for organizing this. My presentation will take about 1 hour, and I will be happy to take questions that you may have after that. Before I start, please keep 2 things in mind. One, when I talk about India in this presentation as well as in the book, it means all of South Asia in the old sense of the term, and not just the Republic of India as we know it today. And the second point is that migrations that shaped human populations is the topic of this, lies at the heart of this talk. And it's important to bear in mind that migrations are what shaped human populations all over the world, and South Asia is no exception in that sense. Over the next 1 hour, we are going to delve deep into Indian prehistory to try and answer some questions that I'm sure we have all grappled with at various times. Why do we speak so many different languages, over 800 languages, nearly 800 languages in the Indian subcontinent, belonging to 4 completely different language families: Indo-European, Dravidian, Austroasiatic, Sino-Tibetan, not to speak of other languages that stand by themselves. What connects us to the people who built the Harappan civilization, the largest one of its time? Are they our ancestors? And where did they disappear? What accounts for the very substantial similarities between us that makes it difficult for people outside of South Asia to distinguish us in our different nationalities? Also, what accounts for the striking dissimilarities or differences between us in terms of languages, in terms of dietary habits, for example? The answer to all of these questions lie in the answer to a larger question, which is, how did the South Asian population form? And until very recently, like as in the last 5 or 6 years, there was no good way to answer that question. We could, of course, use archaeology, linguistics, philology, etc., to arrive at certain guesstimates, but that was about it. And that is what has changed in the last 6 or 7 years. And that's thanks to a relatively new discipline called population genetics, which has acquired the ability to extract and analyze DNA from people who lived thousands or tens of thousands of years ago. And this then allows us to see which population groups moved when and where. For example, let's say that there is an old archaeological site in Chicago, and that from a level at the lowest level, at say 1,000 years ago, you have recovered DNA from skeletons that shows that there is no European ancestry. but that from a level that is only 300 years ago, that you have discovered that there is, that you can notice European ancestry. What that shows is that between those two periods, between 1,000 years ago and 300 years ago, there is a new ancestry that has arrived in Chicago that was not there earlier. Now, in the last few years, hundreds and hundreds of ancient DNA samples have been recovered and analyzed across the world. And that is what has given us a far sharper insight into how different population groups formed around the world. And I would like to show you, this is how our understanding of prehistory around the world has changed. We know, for example, that Europe's demography was reshaped twice within the last 10,000 years. First, a population of farmers, one of the earliest farmers in the world, moved in from West Asia, from regions today known as Turkey and earlier known as Anatolia, into Europe, significantly replaced the then existing hunter-gatherers of Europe or mixed with them to a lesser extent. That was around 9,000 years ago. And then again, about 5,000 years ago, another population of pastoralists from the Central Asian steppe region, known as Yamnaya, moved into Europe, significantly replaced or mixed with, to some extent, with the then existing farmers and whatever remained of the original hunter-gatherer population. So that's what explains the European population as it is today. We know today that the Americas were populated by at least 3 migrations from Asia, going back to 16,000 to 28,000 years ago, based on the latest research. We know that East Asian demography changed twice over in the last 4,000 years or so because of mass migrations. This, for example, is the earliest, this is a member of the earliest modern human group in Europe. It's known as the Cheddar Man. And this image is based on DNA recovered from a skeleton in Cheddar Gorge in Somerset, England, roughly 10,000 years ago. So this is the population group that was significantly replaced or got mixed with later migrations that happened. So so you might ask, there are migrations that happen all the time across all space. And how do we then put a structure to it? How do we know that these migrations shape these populations and not these? The way to understand this is to realize that there is a way to put a structure to it, and that's to realize that there are 4 classes of migrations that shaped most of the world population substantially. There are other migrations that happened over and above this or in between them, but these 4 classes of migrations were driven by global forces, and therefore they were massive, and they continued for a very long period of time. What are these 4 classes of migrations? The first you might have heard about, these are out of Africa migrations, which started around 70,000 years ago. And we will come to it. I will briefly describe the 4 classes of migration before going into it in detail. The second class of migrations are related to modern human population groups taking to agriculture. Third class of migrations are related to some modern human groups acquiring mastery of a horse and metallurgy. And the fourth class of migrations are related to colonial expansions that we all know about. So this, I will go into in detail over all 4 of them. This map shows the 4 possible paths for ancient modern humans out of Africa, because this is, as we discussed, is the out of Africa migration starting around 70,000 years ago that peopled the whole of the world. How do we know this? If we today take DNA from people who live around the world, we would see that all of the non-African populations descend from a small subset of the African population that lived around 70,000 years ago. So to put it in other words, the genetic diversity of Africa is many times more than the genetic diversity of the rest of the human population outside of Africa, because they all come from a small subset of the African population as it existed around 70,000 years ago. Now, when did they move out of Africa, and which path would they have taken? This map shows 4 possible paths out of Africa into Eurasia, from Morocco to Spain, through Strait of Gibraltar, from Tunisia to Sicily, from Egypt to the Levant through the Sinai Peninsula, and of course, from the Horn of Africa into the Arabian Peninsula. So these are the 4 possible paths, of which there is no evidence that the first 2, 1 and 2, were ever used. The third one was heavily used and was probably the earliest route taken by modern humans to move out of Africa into Eurasia, going back even as early as 180,000 years ago. But we know that that did not lead on to the peopling of the world, probably because these areas that you can see were heavily populated by Neanderthals, which probably prevented the entry of modern humans into Eurasia at that point of time. The migration that actually led to the peopling of the world is likely to have happened through this what is called the southern route, the 4th one, which took people from Africa into the Arabian Peninsula and then all over the world. And this is a map that shows what happened next, the peopling of the world. You can see that this is the out of Africa migration, the original one, around 70,000 years ago. You can see a branch coming off into the Indian subcontinent, then going on to Southeast Asia and reaching all the way to Australia. There might have been another branch taking the coastal route, coming down the western coast, up the eastern coast, and then going on to spread. Some groups would have also spread to other parts of Asia, and there would have been other branches at various points of time spreading to Central Asia and into Europe. And of course, sometime between 16,000 and 28,000 years ago, the migrations to the Americas. Now this is so that's what explains the original peopling of the world. So the answer to the question, who were the first Indians, who were the first Australians, who were the first Japanese, who were the first Americans, who were the first Europeans, the answer to that is all the same. They were out of Africa migrants who expanded out of Africa starting around 70,000 years ago. And between 70,000 years ago and sometime between 28 to 16,000 years ago, populated all parts of the world. Now there's an important event that happened in between, and that is the glacial age, which happened between roughly 29,000 years ago and 14,000 years ago. And when glacial ages happen, much of the world's water gets locked up in ice. There's very little evaporation happening, and therefore there's great aridity. Large parts of the world become uninhabitable, and therefore modern human population groups who were expanding at this time got separated from each other, and which also meant they developed along slightly different lines, accumulating minor genetic differences. All modern human population groups today share 99.9% of their DNA. So these differences that we're talking about are minor in the larger scale of things. The next major event, in fact, the most major event in the entire history of the modern human race happened when the glacial age ended, starting around 12,000 years ago. What we then see when the global temperatures went up by an average of 7 degrees Celsius, what we then see are some modern human population groups in various parts of the world, not one place, in various parts of the world, experimenting with agriculture. In fact, the earliest experiments with agriculture may have taken place in Southeast Asia, where people tried to cultivate yams, bananas, tubers, but these were not very successful. but experiments in agriculture where people had the opportunity to domesticate cereals such as wheat, barley, rice, they were very lucky because these crops, their productivity was very high, and which meant that these hunter-gatherers who were experimenting with agriculture could change their lifestyle and become farmers. And these are population groups in the first modern humans to take to agriculture. These were population groups in Egypt, in Mesopotamia, in India, and in China. In all of these areas, what we then see are a humongous explosion in population, because more agriculturists, settled farmers, their population grows at a much higher rate than that of hunter-gatherers. So these population expansions overwhelmed all of the regions nearby. And what the result obviously was mass migrations. So this is the second class of migrations. The first one being out of Africa migrations driven by climatic factors. This second one driven by man's mastery over nature to the extent of inventing agriculture, that led to mass migrations that changed the demography of a very large part of the world. And this is the most significant event in the transition to agriculture, which then sets the stage for everything else, the most important period in human history. The third class of migrations happen when one of these modern human population groups in the Central Asian steppe region master the art of riding a horse and combine that with the knowledge of metallurgy, and that gives them mobility, powerful mobility of the kind that no human population group earlier had experienced. And what that results in are major mass migrations that first went into Europe, as we talked about earlier, and that changed European demography, and also changed the demography of a good part of Central Asia itself, and West Asia, South Asia, and all the way up to China. So this is the third class of migrations that changed the demography of an entire large area in Eurasia. And the last class of mass migrations are things that we or our parents or our grandparents have directly experienced. Those are the colonial migrations, when a small group of modern humans in Europe figured out how to travel large distances overseas and get into regions that are already heavily populated and dominate them. They also invented the steamship. And these colonial migrations changed the demography in many parts of the world, including the Americas and Australia and many other regions. So these are the four classes of migrations driven by global forces that changed global demography, because these migrations continued for a very large periods of time. And that takes us then to the next question. So how did the Indian population form? The first thing to remember when we discuss population formation in the Indian subcontinent is that the last class of migrations, the colonial migrations, did not leave a large impact on our demography, because the number of colonial migrants who reached the Indian subcontinent were too little compared to the existing population, and they left very little demographic mark, even though they did leave a mark on our culture. So to understand Indian population formation, you need to look at the earlier three classes of migrations. And out of those three classes of migrations, there are four actual migrations that happened, which we will go into in detail. Of course, starting with the out of Africa migrants, then the agricultural migration that happened in the northwestern region of India, then an agricultural migration from East Asia that affected our demography, and then a migration from the Central Asian steppe region that affected our demography. We will go into in detail with each of them. So this is, if you want to understand the first Indians or the first modern humans who arrived in India, this is a sample home of the first Indians. This is a rock shelter in a place called Bhimbetka, near Bhopal in India's Madhya Pradesh. And this has been lived in for nearly continuously for nearly 100,000 years. And you know that modern humans arrived in India only around 65 or 65,000 years ago. And therefore, this means that these were occupied by earlier members of other Homo species who were in India. So it has been continuous occupation for 100,000 years. You can almost look at this. It's a beautiful place. And you could almost look at it as a luxury resort where there was a waiting list for humans of all kinds for a very long period of time. And when the first Indians, how do we know, when did the first Indians arrive here, and what is the likely period? We have not discovered old enough fossils to answer that question, but we have, if you go by evidence left behind by modern humans in Australia and Southeast Asia and elsewhere, we can arrive at a tentative rate. The evidence from Australia suggests that modern humans were there at least by 59,000 years ago, and in East Asia at least by 63,000 years ago. And since modern humans would have reached there most likely going through the Indian subcontinent, then it's a reasonable assumption that they were in India by around 65,000 years ago. But when they reached India, were they entering an empty land with no close competition, as modern humans were found when they migrated to the Americas or Australia? The answer is absolutely not. They were moving into a region that was already heavily populated by earlier members of the Homo species. We do not know who they were, whether they were whether they belonged to the Homo erectus subspecies or the Homo heidelbergensis. But we do know that they were there in numbers because of the stone tools that they have left behind. Tremendous amount of stone tools, especially from the regions in central India and southern India or the peninsular India. And the earliest stone tool that we have discovered, it goes back to about 1.5 million years ago from Attirambakam near Chennai in Tamil Nadu. So, and modern humans have been in, the earliest fossil of a modern human is only as old as 300,000 years ago. So, which means other Homo species have been living in India 5 times as long as that. So, when modern humans first arrived into the Indian subcontinent, they were faced with a robust existing population of earlier Homo species, and therefore archaeologists say that it is likely that they stayed out of the way of the existing populations, and that they reached different parts of India at very different points of time, following a pattern of Indian, what they call Indian staged dispersal, that they reached India, different parts of India at different points of time. This tells us that the old assumption that we probably, some of us still carry, that somehow the modern humans were very superior to the rest other members of the Homo species is not correct, as we have seen repeatedly. Archaeologists find it difficult to distinguish the kind of tools that were made by Homo sapiens as opposed to others, and they had brain size as similar to ours. So it is unlikely that we had any distinctive advantage over them through most of the period that Homo sapiens shared the world with other members of the Homo species. So it is likely, archaeologists say, that the earliest modern humans arrived in India took a path through the sub-Himalayan region, with their descendants going on to Southeast Asia and Australia. And it's also likely that there was another branch which took a coastal route, which came down the western coast and then went up the eastern coast and occupied, and then went on to the rest of Asia. But is there a time, can we say, when did they were in complete control of the subcontinent? Is there a time then we can say that they were in control of the subcontinent? Because we do know that all other Homo species went extinct, not just in India, all over the world. In Europe, for example, the Neanderthals went extinct around 40,000 years ago, a few thousand years after modern humans reached there. So in India, we do not have an exact date for when the other Homo species went extinct, but 35,000 years ago looks like a reasonable assumption, because by then we see many things happening together. There is a profusion of microlithic tools, which were created only by modern humans, which are just stone tools that are a few centimeters long and are often hafted on to bone or wood to create spears, arrows, etc. And these were very powerful weapons. And we see a profusion of these kind of weapons that modern humans invented across India. We also see from the genetic track record, there is a sudden increase in the population of modern humans in India, probably making India the center of modern human population by around 20,000 years ago. So remember, whenever you talk about South Asia being a center of the modern human population today, that's not a new record. That's a record that goes back nearly 20,000 years ago. So we are talking about a sudden expansion of modern human population, and in India around that period, 35,000 years ago. So you could assume that that's the time when the world was slowly getting into a glacial age and beginning to get into a glacial age, and therefore competition for habitational areas between people would have, between humans of different subspecies would have been significant. At this point of time, we see modern human population group expanding significantly. So that's the story of the first Indians. So now there are questions that we often asked: where can we find them? Where are their descendants? Where do we have to go to find their descendants? Do we have to go to Andaman and Nicobar Islands or somewhere else? We have a surprising answer. And that answer is mostly you have to look into the mirror or look around, stand up and look around, if you are in India, that is. Because most modern human population groups in India today carry 50 to 65% of their ancestry from the first Indians who reached here 65,000 years ago. This is not something that we knew earlier, that we know now. In terms of the metaphor that I use in my book, this is the base of the Indian demographic pizza. Without it, there is no Indian demographic pizza. This is what makes South Asia unique, because this particular ancestry of the first Indians is not seen anywhere outside of South Asia. So this is what makes us different. I mean, this is what makes us unique. And this is what makes South Asia accounts for a large number of the similarities between South Asia also. So that's one question answered. That takes us to the next question. What were the other migrations? What was the next migration that happened? As we heard, after the out of Africa migration, the next migrations were large migrations were shaped by agriculture, right? So the answer to that question is to ask the question, so when did agriculture begin in the Indian subcontinent? You can see that place marked in red. That's a place called Mehergarh in the Balochistan province of Pakistan. That's from where we get the earliest evidence of agriculture in India, going back to 9,000 years ago or 7,000 BCE. And you can see experiments in agriculture beginning, domestication of cattle happening on a large level. And you see over the next thousands of years, over the next few centuries and thousands of years, you see agriculture spreading across the entire northwestern region, the shaded region. And that's the spread of the agricultural revolution that happened, that gradually over thousands of years led to the rise of the Harappan civilization. Without the agricultural revolution, there would be no Harappan civilization. It's the necessary condition for the urban civilization to arise. And if agriculture began around 9,000 years ago, what we see is that by around 2,600 BCE, the Harappan civilization enters its mature phase. That's about 4,600 years ago. And this shaded region shows the extent of the Harappan civilization, which existed from 2,600 to 1900 BCE, about 700 years. Now, who were the people who created this agricultural revolution and then the Harappan civilization? Genetics tells us that they were a mixture of the first Indians who were here from 65,000 years ago, and a population related to the early farmers of Iran, most probably from the Zagros mountain region. You can see here, Zagros mountain region is towards the eastern limit of the Mesopotamian civilization. And this is also the region from where, in a place called Ganjdare, we get the earliest evidence of goat domestication. And so this is a mixed population of first Indians and early farmers related to a population related to the early farmers of Iran that drove the agricultural revolution in northwestern India, and then the Harappan civilization. And when the Harappan civilization declined, around 1900 BCE, because of a long drought that affected other civilizations of its time as well, what we see are the Harappans significantly moving out of that region of northwestern India, eastwards into North India, southwards into South India, and they spread all over the subcontinent, carrying their ancestry, the cultural practices they had perfected in the Harappan civilization, and their language. And so in a sense, the Harappans are the ancestors of all Indians. So the answer to the question, who were the Harappans and where did they disappear, we now have. The Harappans are a mixture of first Indians and the early farmers of Iran. They spread all over the subcontinent after their civilization declined, and they're the ancestors of all Indians. The Harappan civilization was very unique in a lot many aspects. We often do not realize that it was the largest civilization of its time in terms of both population and area, as big as both Mesopotamia and the Egyptian civilizations put together. And when you say, and that's why it left and it survived for 700 years. And when they spread and taking their culture with them, they have left significant marks on our civilization, even as it is today. So a lot of the commonalities that we see in the region, many of them, we can attribute it to the practices that were, the things that were practiced in the Harappan civilization. For example, the way that we build our houses around courtyards. That's the way houses were built in the Harappan civilization. The idea that the people tree is sacred, that comes from the Harappan civilization, because you can see images where there are deities inside the people tree and people venerating them. The profusion of bangles, no other civilization has ever discovered as many bangles as the Harappan civilization. There are even tales from the images from the Harappan civilization that remind you of Panchatantra tales of the crow putting a stone in a pitcher of water to raise the level, etc., that you can see in the images. So some of the tales that we tell our children were probably tales that were told by the Harappans to their children. Board games like chess, and dice, there are a very large number of things that are the moment you see them, you can connect it, we can connect ourselves to the people who built the Harappan civilization. If you haven't been to, I visited Dholavira, the most striking Harappan site in India. I could not visit the sites in Pakistan despite my best efforts because of a lack of visa. I'd hope someday to visit them. The Dholavira is a striking and stunning site. And when you stand there, it really moves you. These are things that were built 4,600 years ago. Almost all of the Harappan cities were built with a plan, and they have the scale and the ambition that surprised you, because after the civilization declined, how long do you have to wait to see the similar scale and ambition? You have to wait more than 1,000 years until the Maurya arrive. So that's in Magadha. So that's the kind of impression that the Harappan civilization has left behind. But it's also striking to note that we do not feel a cultural connect to the Harappan civilization as we ought to. Because when I went to Dhalavera, for example, one would have thought there almost very few visitors. It's not mentioned in our cultural memories. It's not in our cultural memories. It's not in our ancient literature. So somehow we have lost a connection to the Harappan civilization, even though if you look close enough, you can see the continuities. So this is the second migration that significantly shaped the Indian population after, in terms of the metaphor that I use, it's the sauce on top of the base, that spread all over as the Harappan civilization declined. The third migration that shaped Indian population, it came from East Asia, and that this is also these are some, before I go into the third migration, these are some slides from, this is Mohenjo-daro, Sindh. This is from Dholavira. The picture that you see on the right side is probably a kind of stadium, a stage where people could sit. And there is a very large area that could have been used as a stadium. For what could have been used for, you can only imagine. And Dholavira was very well known for its water conservation techniques, because Dholavira was built in an area that was already, there was shortage of water. You might wonder, why would they build a city in an area where there is shortage of water? Because it was perfectly located near the sea for trade with Mesopotamia. The Harappans were an extremely trade conscious and trade dependent, who traded with the Mesopotamian civilization to a very large extent. And these are reservoirs that you can see, the largest of its time anywhere in the world. The third migration that shaped Indian demography came from East Asia. And this was also an agricultural related migration. So there are two agriculture related migrations that shaped the demography of India. This was a result, this large migration was the result of China taking to agriculture. The result of China taking to agriculture were two large migrations. One which took the island route and affected many populations and islands in the Pacific Ocean. And the other one which took the land route and came across Southeast Asia all the way into India, carrying a new language called Austroasiatic languages, and of course, agricultural practices. These languages in India are today, like Khasi and Mundari, are spoken by tribals in central and eastern India. And they're very closely related to the Mon Khmer family of languages spoken in Southeast Asia, in Vietnam, in Thailand, and many other regions. So this is the third migration that significantly affected the demography of India. And this came from East Asia around 4,000 years ago. And that takes us then to the last migration. The only one that is raises controversy because none of the earlier three migrations are controversial, and this is controversial for we can discuss that later. Why only this migration causes a controversy? But this is what this map is actually in its peer-reviewed version was published last year. And this shaded area is the Central Asian steppe region from where the migrations took place. And you can see around 5,000 years ago, after 3000 BCE, there's a migration that took place into Europe, right? And this is the migration that changed the demography of Europe significantly, as we discussed earlier. These migrations also happened towards the east, and they spread towards South Asia between 2000 BCE and 1500 BCE. That's between 4000 and 3500 years ago. This is the migration that brought Indo-Aryan languages, which is a subset of Indo-European languages, to India. And these are Indo-Aryan language-speaking people who call themselves Arya. And they significantly changed the demography, especially of northern India. And they also shifted the language spoken by people in northern India from pre-Aryan and what was likely Proto-Dravidian languages into Indo-Aryan languages. The new evidence from the ancient DNA actually shortens the period of the migration. Earlier, the assumption was that the migration happened between 2000 BCE and 1000 BCE. New evidence suggests that the migration happened during a shorter time span between 2000 BCE and 1500 BCE. That's a period of about 500 years. And that's because after 1500 BCE, the demography of the source populations from where these migrations happened in today's Kazakhstan, they changed significantly with more migrations from Asia, from the East Asia happening into these regions and changing their demography. So if there were migrations from the Kazakhstan region into South Asia after 1500 BCE, we should see more East Asian ancestry in India, which we did not. Steppe region are likely to have happened between 4,000 years ago to 3,500 years ago. So it's giving us a clearer, resolution into the migrations that shaped the Indian population. You should also remember that these migrations now explain the spread of Indo-European languages around the world. Indo-European languages are spoken by around 40% of the people today. And that includes languages spoken in northern India, from Hindi to Gujarati to Bengali, to most of the languages spoken in northern India, to Persian, to almost all of these languages spoken in Western Europe, with the exception of Basque. That includes German, English, Spanish, all of the European languages. And now, how did this language family get spread in this manner across the world? The westernmost limit of the Indo-European language-speaking family, you could say, is in Iceland, in the Eurasian region, and the easternmost limit is Bangladesh. To the east of Bangladesh, you will not find any large communities speaking Indo-European languages. So what explains this spread of this language is also these migrations from Central Asian steppe region, which impacted Europe, all of Central Asia, as well as South Asia, and all the way up to China. So these migrations explain the spread of Indo-European languages around the world as well. Now, so now we know that by around 1500 BCE, all the four major components that shaped Indian demography are in, right? The first Indians are in, the West Asians are in, the East Asians are in, and so are the Central Asian pastoralists who brought Indo-Aryan languages. So those are the four more components of the Indian population that they're all in. And then what happens in the succeeding centuries? Genetics has a clear story to tell. And that says, in the succeeding centuries, all the way up to 100 BCE, what followed is a mixing of the kind that has never been seen earlier or later. To understand that, we have to go back and see this period in its totality. And if anybody were to ask you, which is the most tumultuous period in Indian history ever, you should have no doubt in saying that this is that period. After the decline of the Harappan civilization, a period of about almost 2000 years. So look at all that happened. A civilization, the largest of its kind in the world, that has survived for 700 years, begins to fall apart. That itself would be traumatic. And people move all over the subcontinent in search of new lifestyles. But that doesn't end there. There's new migration that happens from East Asia, bringing new languages and new practices. And it doesn't end there. There's yet another migration that happens from the Central Asian steppe, bringing new languages and who dominate northern India. So all of this happened between the periods of 2000 BCE and about 100 BCE. And this period sees the kind of mixing between all the different population groups, migration groups that had happened in a manner that has left no group in India unaffected. No group. This is important. The only group that would have left unaffected by these migrations is the other people in Andaman and Nicobar Islands who were cut off from the mainland and therefore did not get affected by the later migrations. But everyone else in India, no matter how remote a region today, no matter how remote, today carries genetic evidence of the mixing that happened, that went on for 2000 years. This is important because no matter where in the, for example, no matter where in the caste hierarchy you stand, no matter what language you speak, no matter what religion you follow, no matter which region you inhabit, you all carry the ancestry of the first Indians. We all carry to varying extents, we all carry the ancestry of the later migrations that happened. The West Asians, the East Asians, the Central Asians, in varying proportions in different regions. In Eastern India, you would find more of the East Asian ancestry. In Northern India, you will find more of the West Asian and Central Asian ancestry. In Southern India, you will find more of the first Indian ancestry, but all Indian population groups are mixed. And because of this mixing that happened over a long period of time, this is a new understanding, and this should change the way we look at ourselves and others. For example, the rest of the Indian population, for example, has long looked at the tribals as people who are very different from them. Now we know that that's not true. The rest of the Indian population, if they have the closest relatives they have in the world, they have no closer relatives than the tribals because they share the most largest ancestry that they carry, that South Asian ancestry. But then why do we say 100 BCE? What happened after 100 BCE? That's also an important part of our history and explains many things which would not be explainable otherwise. Around 100 CE, genetics tells us that the mixing between population groups started fading away as endogamy became the dominant practice. Endogamy is the practice of people marrying within their own communities. And we know that that's the distinguishing mark of the caste system. So now we have an approximate date from genetic evidence to when the caste system began becoming common across the country. That's around 100 CE. It's about 2000 years ago. And so it means that that this endogamy has been practiced for almost 2000 years. That has also left its mark on the genetic makeup of the Indian population, just as the mixing previously had. The caste system falls into place. This is important to remember after the mixing had already happened to a large extent. So in that sense, the earlier idea that the caste system began with the arrival of the Arya or the Central Asian migrants is not correct because that happened more than 1,000 years earlier. So the way to look at this, the falling into place of the caste system is as a political event that happened around 2,000 years ago. And you need to understand what then was happening to empires and to ideologies, social ideologies then, and what made this way of organizing society become popular around the entire subcontinent. My book goes into in detail on that, and in some detail on that. We do not have the full answers now. What we now can say is that we now have a genetic evidence on when it started, how it started, and why it fell in place are things that we need further research to understand. We can today say that if you look at there's a major way, there's a simple way to understand what mark our caste system has left on our society. Because today, if you look at genetic differences within the same village, there are 2 to 3 times the differences between North and South Europeans. A distance usually creates genetic differences are larger, the more distant two regions are, because there is less mixing that happens because of the distance. But there shouldn't be such distance when you're talking about the same village, especially. So that difference is entirely due to strong. So this is what happened around 100 CE. That's what explains many things that would otherwise be unexplainable. Which also means that the idea did not bring. It's not a caste system. That a caste system is not coterminous with the arrival of the idea. It takes place much later, and this is also, we know this, that from the earliest Vedic references, in the Rig Veda, for example, many of the rishis are sons of mothers who would later be considered as low caste. And there is there is only one verse from the entire collection of the Rig Veda that is often used to justify the caste system, which talks about, which is called the Purusha Sukta from the 10th mandala of the Rig Veda, which talks about how various castes arose from different parts of the body of the cosmic man or Purusha. And but most experts agree that this is a later interpolation into the Rig Veda, and which was interpolation intending to give post facto justification for the caste system. But we need more research into this. But these are so this is the so as we to use the you could say the Central Asian migrants as the cheese on top of the pizza, which is all over, but not necessarily distributed equally. There's more of it in North India than in South India. There are also other migrations that happened, which in the language of the metaphor are toppings. Because we know that there are many migrations that happen, migrations and invasions, the Greeks, the Sakas, the Huns, the Arabs, the Mughals, of course, the Portuguese, the French, the Dutch, the English, the Jews, the Parsis. I mean, there's a whole range of migrations that came into India. But the important point to remember is that none of these left a large enough mark on the Indian demography. If you want to understand Indian demography, you still have to go by the 4 large ancient migrations that we talked about: the out of Africa migrants, the West Asians, the East Asians, and the Central Asians. These other migrations that happened later had very small genetic impact on our demography, but sometimes large cultural impact. This is a short. This is a timeline that sums up what we discussed so far, and to give a quick overall picture, you can see that the first Indians, or first modern humans, arrive in India around 65,000 years ago. They become a dominant presence in the subcontinent around 35,000 years ago, and a population related to early farmers from Iran, they're in India by around 12,000 years ago. We see beginnings of agriculture in Mehergar in the Balochistan province of Pakistan around 9,000 years ago. And between 9,000 BCE, between 7,000 BCE to 2,600 BCE, we see the spread of agriculture across entire northwestern India, spearheaded by a mixed population of first Indians and the population related to the early farmers of Iran. And then we see the mature period of the Harappan civilization from 2600 BCE to 1900 BCE, and then a long drought that devastates many civilizations, including the Harappan one, at around 1900 BCE. And around that time, we see East Asia, migrants from East Asia bringing Austroasiatic languages and new agricultural practices. And between 2000 BCE to 1500 BCE are the migrations of pastoralists from Central Asia who called themselves Aryan. And from 2000 BCE to 100 CE, which is almost a period of 2000 years, this is a period of mixing between the four groups that leaves almost no population group in the Indian mainland affected. Then we see around between 600 BCE is the second urbanization of India, with the rise of new cities, the new rise of Magadha, and new religions and philosophies such as Buddhism, etc. And around 100 BCE, mixing comes to an end as endogamy, or the practice of people marrying within their own communities, take hold. So that's the short history of the peopling of the subcontinent, and which has 7 implications. One is that we are all migrants and we are all mixed. There is no population group in India today that has been left unaffected by the waves of migrations that shaped all of us as we are. The ancestry of the first Indians is the foundation of the Indian demography. Tribals, in quotation marks, single quotation marks, are us, and that's a new understanding. The earliest source of our civilization is the Harappan civilization. The Arya-Vedic Sanskrit culture is not the earliest source. It's one of the many important constituents of our culture and religion as we see it today, which is a mixture of different cultures and migration histories. The caste system was not inevitable. In fact, we stopped and turned the clock back around 2000 years ago. And last, unity in diversity is not a cliche. It's the most accurate description of us, and it is true in a meaningful way. We are all migrants and we are all mixed. Thank you very much.